Hi, I'm John Byrne with Poets and Quants. Welcome to our webinar today, which is being broadcast live on Facebook Live. We have 4 of the most favorably reviewed admission consultants at Poets and Quants. And what we want to do is not only introduce you to them, but we want to have a sense of, who should be availing themselves of a consultant, who needs it, who doesn't need it, what do consultants actually do, what should you be looking for before you hire a consultant to get into an elite MBA school. And I think we're going to have a fascinating discussion. We have 2 people in this group who happen to be married, and they both are in Amsterdam. They're David White and Alice Van Harten, and they're both with Menlo Coaching. And David spent a lot of time in the tech industry before becoming a founding partner of Menlo Coaching with his wife, Alice. Alice is a former Bain consultant. She actually had offers at BCG and McKinsey. Very impressive, Alice. Mm-hmm. And until the couple returned to the Netherlands, which was only a couple of years ago, because I recall seeing you just before you ventured off. You were teaching humanities at Stanford University. We have a local gal, Betsy Masser. Betsy has a Harvard MBA, spent most of her life in finance, and has now been doing consulting as a founder and CEO of Master Admissions for the past 10 plus years. Welcome. And we also have Jessica Burlingame, who happens to be in Paris. Lucky you.
Lucky me.
Yes. And Jessica is with the MBA Exchange, which is based in Chicago. And Jessica has an MBA from Columbia Business School. And she has about 11 years of experience working with MBA candidates, starting out, I guess, as a GMAT instructor. Good God. I hate that test. And then moving into full service consulting. She had been in healthcare consulting and private and investment banking before that. Welcome, everybody. So let's take the first question. Who really needs a consultant and who doesn't need a consultant? And Jessica, why don't we go with you in Paris first?
Sure, bien sûr. Bonsoir à tous. Who needs a consultant? I think that our discussion a little bit beforehand about who might really need a guide through MBA land, essentially. So people who are working in non-traditional industries, people who are working in smaller workplaces where the social capital around an MBA, what is an MBA, what do I need to get in, might not be so abundant. I think that person needs the support of a consultant more than somebody who's working at McKinsey, let's say. However, I think anybody can benefit from the services of a consultant. If you are working at a top MBA feeder school, you're one of many, many people in that situation. So while you have a lot of information, so do all of your incredibly talented, well-credentialed, sophisticated competitors within that milieu as well. I think also when I'm talking to clients, and I really believe this, if I'm doing my job right and they're engaging with me and we're both engaged to our fullest, anybody can benefit from a consultant, essentially, because the benefits should endure past that admission letter. You got to get the admission letter, right? And that's what we're here for. That's our job. That's what we're hired to do. But the reflective process, really introspection about why do I want to do what I say I want to do? Am I sure I want to do what I say I want to do? What's the impact I want to have throughout my career, throughout my education? I think that work with a quality consultant should have a ripple effect well beyond that admissions letter.
And I would think that's the most underappreciated part of the consulting assignment by a newbie who's coming into this relationship, right? Mm-hmm. The guidance that one gets through this introspective period about looking at one's life and deciding, what do I really want to do? And how's the MBA going to help me get there? Alice, how do you help people through that journey?
Through the journey of self-reflection, you mean? Yeah. Well, that's of course one of the most essential parts of the application. And I like to start with the process with a very long personal conversation. And I almost always begin by asking, could you tell me about yourself, starting with the family that you grew up in? So it's not through a series of forms. I just want to get to know the person. It's this person-to-person contact that I want to see reflected in the final essay. So it's a very long conversation, exploration with the client about their story. And often the client won't quite know in advance what we're going to talk about, right? What's going to be the interesting part about their story. So I dig and I hunt and I analyze for those golden nuggets that are going to be the main ingredients of my client's story.
Betsy, give us an example of that. In other words, bring us into an early session with a client and how you get at some of the unique characteristics that you want to portray in an application.
I think the best thing to do is to build trust, and in doing so, I'm going to back up a little bit and not give quite the example that you want, but we're trying to build trust. And so like Alice, it's a long conversation. And a lot of times I want to make sure that the student feels comfortable that even if we go down the wrong path, or what ends up being the wrong path, that maybe it'll end up leading to the right path later. So if I say to you, John, tell me about why you chose the major that you did when you were in college, and you'll think to yourself, maybe that's not that relevant, or it's like obvious why you did, or something along those lines, then we may just keep going in the dialogue so that it ends up uncovering something that ends up being helpful to you. And we don't know what's going to be helpful right at the moment, because a lot of threads all come together. And so it's like later on, I'll be like, oh, originally, your sister said this to you as you were embarking on your career as a journalist, and that really influenced you. And you find out these really small pieces that build one on the other, because it isn't, I want to caution people who are watching or listening that it isn't like, oh, and I was a really great leader when I was 7 years old, or when I was president of my junior high school class. I mean, those are patterns that are good, and some of them may or may not be relevant, but it's really more about the quality of the way people make their own decisions. Don't know if that's answering the question or not, but that's where I go with it.
Mm. And now, David, what are the general guidelines for picking an admissions consultant? What are the kind of questions that a potential client should ask and look for in deciding who to go with?
That's a good question. And I know that picking an admissions consultant can be a pretty nerve-wracking process. I've sometimes compared the process of applying to an MBA and getting the advice almost to, you've been charged with a DUI. You can get a lot of free information on LegalZoom. You can hire the guy, he can probably get the charge reduced. Or you can hire someone who's going to do it right, and you can be confident of getting a good outcome.
And David, I'm sure you have no experience in this regard.
I do not, but I know people who have.
Okay.
But the first step is, I think, you have to have a level of education about the process before you can shop in a smart way. So I often send people to read some of the articles on poets and quants. That one big question we get pretty early in the process is a lot of people asking, so, what are my chances at Harvard? And, outside of certain categories of applicant, I tend to tell them, Harvard's pretty tough. Why don't you read this story? You won't believe who Harvard just declined. They put it out every year. And, let's look at that. Because then you need to speak to these admissions consultants. You might ask them some questions about, where am I going to be a realistic applicant? And you check, are you hearing something sensible? Are they telling you on the one hand, something way too optimistic, just sign here and I can get you into Harvard? That's not how it works. Are they beating you down too much? No, you're never going to amount to anything unless you get my help. So, if you know what you're doing, you're going to do better on that. Other things, just use your common sense. So you might ask them, how many people do you work with? I think that's one of the underappreciated dimensions. So we're pretty strict, limiting how many people we work with at one time so that we have enough time for each person. And I've seen cases where people handle a big book of business and divide it into kind of likely to be admitted, not likely to be admitted, and the promising ones get a better service. So you need to be careful there. And
what's the right number? What's the answer? What's the answer a person should be looking for?
so I don't think that people are going to get a straight answer on that question anyway. I mean, I'll tell you that we have, between me and Alice, 27 people for round one, and we're done. So that's what we think is responsible. But you know, exactly what service you're getting, it depends on the scope of the service, I suppose. But it needs to be a reasonable amount.
Right. Any other thoughts from our other panelists on what things need to be considered by a potential client before making the decision to hire a consultant? Yeah, Betsy.
I think it's useful, if possible, to talk to people you know who have used consultants, whether or not they recommend. So if I have somebody I'm talking to about, do you want to work with me? I actually think they should just understand a little bit more about what it's like to work with a consultant, because there are a lot of expectations, some of which are right, spot on, and some of which are not. And finding out what the consulting industry asks for from people is very useful. I mean, like Alice and I and Jessica and David, I'm sure we try to get into a lot of what makes people tick. So if somebody's not entirely comfortable with sharing, and it isn't as if you have to bring out all your dirty linen from forever and ever, but if you're not if you feel really like you don't want to share that with a professional consultant, then maybe the consulting relationship isn't for you. Maybe it works better to work with a friend or a family member, and there's nothing wrong with that either. So I think it's important to understand what the nature of the relationship is like, and then also to talk to people and get a feel. It's just like interviewing somebody to work on your team. They can have all the qualifications in the world on paper, but how do you feel about working with them?
What about industry and educational background? So in other words, let's say I know I want to go to healthcare consulting, and I may want to go to Columbia Business School. Should I hire Jessica? Or I know I want to go to Harvard and I want to work in finance and I'm a woman. Should I hire Betsy? Or I know I want to work for McKinsey, Bain, BCG. So should I hire Alice? Or guess what? I want to end up in tech, and maybe I should hire David. Does that matter?
Well, start with, I do like working with consultants, but I think it's more for me that it throws me back to my consulting years, and I enjoy hearing what especially Bain consultants are up to these days. You know, there's the confidentiality issue, but still it gets me back into my old life. But I think you really become an expert in many industries, but even if you aren't an expert, a lot of what we do is ask questions. We ask our clients to explain themselves in clear and simple terms. And actually having that industry background can be a handicap, because you don't come to the client quite as freshly, and you already have this basic understanding of what they're doing. Whereas what they need to do is they need to tell their story, and the more complicated it is, the more clear it needs to be to, in principle, a layperson. So I absolutely don't think that you need a specialist background to help someone within a certain industry.
I mean, although it can be useful, it sometimes indicates that they're not asking the more important question, which is the person really good at admissions consulting in the first place? That it's a kind of a myth that everyone is the same and you just pick the one who you have an affinity with. But actually, you know, you want someone who has expertise in this process, and they must be good at so many things, that getting your story out, helping you prep for the interview, or expressing yourself clearly.
Right, and to that point too, when we start to talk about myself as somebody from Columbia with a background in healthcare consulting, or Betsy as somebody with a Harvard background in finance, I think we begin to dehumanize and commodify ourselves and our colleagues, right? And I would say that, yes, profiles matter, absolutely. And you know, there are some branding and points. You know, you are up to a point your test score in this process. That's important. Run from any consultant who tries to imply that test scores aren't important. They're not the be all and end all, but they're important. On the other hand, I would also say run from a consultant who reduces you to a profile, who says you are your test score, you are your job, you are your GPA, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's the same thing with a consultant. A consultant is a complex human being. You, an applicant, are a complex human being. Admissions committees are made up of complex, hardworking, talented, sophisticated human beings. And I think, you know, looking for the respect and the humanity that can be afforded by any admissions consultant are absolutely vital. There are so many incentives to be just dehumanizing in this industry and reduce ourselves and our colleagues and potentially our clients and the schools whom we hope to serve eventually by getting the right people to them, people who are going to thrive in their communities. And so I would say that, yeah, respecting all the very sophisticated, dedicated, talented, motivated humans in this process is really important. That's number one for me.
As a
Now, oh, I'm sorry. So we have people from all over, like we have solo practitioners, boutique, and big firm. Betsy, since you're up here, does it make a difference?
I do think well, to me, it makes a difference because I own and run my own practice. And so I feel like when somebody calls me about an interview or whether they want to work with me, I'm the person, we get to know each other and they can get a sense of who I am. And I don't have like a sales person in front of me or even anybody. We're trying to figure out who we are. Now I was to the last point going to say that I'm not the only person that sometimes looks at an application. I have a trusted advisor. She works with me. Her name is Frances, and she's a consultant. I'm a former investment banker, so I can draw upon my advisor and her experience in having been a recruiter at a large management consulting firm or having hired PE people. That's something she knows more about than I do. So all of us, I think, have our own networks of experts, such as even communications help. I know Alice mentioned that she works with a professional communications person when they do interview coaching. I also have people like that. So the individual isn't just some solo warrior doing everything, because I don't know everything. And I admit I don't know everything. So, but I'm the front person and I'm the person that somebody works with. And if they feel that they're going to get well served by me, then that's what I know about an individual consultant or a small consulting firm. I think boutique firms are 2 to 3 people that draw on each other's strengths as opposed to a very, very big firm. I will admit very big firms have a much broader depth, but I don't really know if you're actually, I think Jessica can talk to that, about whether you're getting the same individual kind of upfront communication.
Yeah, so Jessica, what's your take on that?
Sure. Well, the caveat before I give you my current take is that I joined the MBA exchange as I think the 6th consultant on the team, and I've stuck around through a period of I don't know that explosive is correct terminology for the growth, but I've worked with the MBA exchange in a number of incarnations. And to David's point earlier and to Betsy's, yes, I have a built-in network that is broad and deep within the MBA exchange, for which I'm very grateful. And that includes not only the colleagues that I have and have had over the years, but our base of former clients and reach of former clients is also a great advantage that I think we draw on effectively in terms of helping current clients network and do more research within the schools. That said, while I know and I do draw on the tremendous team of colleagues and leaders that I have, we're very much on a one client, one consultant model. So once that match is made, it is a very intimate relationship. I've had more than one client compare me to a therapist, which I'm not. You know, I'd like to use this platform to dispel that right away. This is not my expertise, training, qualification at all. That said, the focus and the intimacy of the client and consultant relationship is there, is really deep with me and all my clients.
And I should just remind the audience, you know, the four of you are here because we have a directory of poets and quants that's filled with profiles of admission consultants. We allow for verified reviews, and you four have been more reviewed than anyone else. And there are something like 300 plus consultants in the directory. You four are at the very top in terms of reviews. And I just want to make a point that I think that a person who ultimately decides to actually take the time to endorse their consultant, that's a very special thing, because after all, we're all super busy, don't have a lot of time, and either you have an axe to grind and you do it, and your motivation is clear. But if you're actually doing this out of your heart, and you really feel like you connected and the person really helped you, I think that's a really special thing. And that's why all four of you are here. What do you think is the most difficult part of the consulting relationship? David?
Well, I'm going to say that it varies from person to person. So you get some people where they need more help on the practical side, that articulating their career goals or convincing the admissions committee that they really are going to get that job is the hard part. Or, you know, maybe if I say what's the hardest part, you need people to do all of the work they need to do to get the result. So it's not just kind of editing the essays or whispering the secrets in their ear, but we have our people. We kicked off with round 1 in March so that we could crack the whip and get people on the road to actually visit the schools, because we regarded this as a very important thing. And then we had an experience for a long time of kind of nagging people to do what they needed to do. And in theory, they should be doing it enthusiastically. Why did they hire an admissions consultant except that they wanted to maximize their chances? But then getting them to actually go out on the road and do it can sometimes be hard. So we've started to use the kind of peer pressure inherent in a group setting, bringing them together in groups of applicants to talk so that they can put a little bit of pressure on each other. And I have a few people right now in the middle of a 5 or 6 school trip, which I was very pleased with. So I think partly people know what they need to do, but actually getting them to do it is one of the hardest parts.
And I actually think that's one of the good reasons to hire a consultant, because a consultant keeps you on track, probably imposes a bit more discipline and nudging on you. And many of these people have already demanding jobs. And if they're working with one of you while they're also prepping for the GMAT to get a better score, it's, you know, there's not a whole lot of time in your life, and it's hard to squeeze some stuff in. So I think actually having a consultant can keep you on track and keep you ahead of the game, even though probably from your side of the fence, it may be frustrating to have to nag a client to do simple things like, hey, have you had that conversation with your recommender? What feedback did you get? Or did you visit this campus at this time? And hey, if you want to really get this done in round 1, you know, I have a few other clients. I can't do this on the day of the deadline.
Another thing that that's a good part of the job. It's difficult, but it's good. It's when students lose perspective. I've done this for many years. We've all done this for many years. We've seen some patterns and some similarities. I can tell certain people when they feel like it's 2 months out that they're never going to get anything done. I'm like, it's going to happen. I've never missed a deadline with a client. You're going to get this in, you know, just do the work. Don't use these procrastinating techniques to worry instead. So there's a lot of times where we know something, even just about the mechanics of it. Like, yeah, it's okay to call an admissions office and ask if they received the transcript. Okay, they're not going to ding you if you make these kinds of of inquiries. And so just a little bit of sanity and balance. Everyone here is going to talk about the hand holding, and I like it. I mean, it can get a little stressful for all of us because we're invested. And I think the hardest part is when you get really, really invested in somebody and you really believe in everything that's going to happen, and we can't control the outcome.
Right. So we have 5 minutes for our discussion. Then we're going to open up to questions. So if any of you have questions, I see them already piling up. So weigh in our last 5 minutes, and then we'll get to your questions. Pet peeves. Jessica, what's your biggest pet peeve about what you do?
Oh my goodness. I think this dovetails with what we were just discussing. Frequently when I'm speaking to clients before we've decided to work together, I'll say, listen, I'm a good consultant. I'm not a good private investigator, and I'm not a good wildlife tracker. So, you mentioned, I think nudge was your term. Project management might be another gloss on the same concept, but there's only so much I can do to keep the engagement going. I would say a pet peeve is when I have to stop being an admissions consultant and really, put on my wildlife tracking gear or put on my private investigator gear. So where's my Yeti client? I like doing this. I've been doing it for a long time, and and I like people who like doing it, who engage with me. An engaged client is my favorite scenario. So,
Alice, you have a pet peeve?
Pet peeve.
Absolutely. It concerns, just the other day, I'd given a client a slightly harsh message. He was going to withdraw he was around, 2 applicants had come to me to start afresh in round 1, and he was going to withdraw his round 2 application and throw it in round 1 because it wasn't quite the school that he wanted to go to. And he wanted to withdraw before the deadline. And he left it till the day of the decision. And I scolded him a bit. I said, you should have done this earlier. This is not nice for the school to get this message from you on the day. And he said, oh, I hope you don't think badly of me. I didn't tell him, but I almost wanted to say, hey, if I'm getting grumpy, it's because you're doing something that I think is not in your interest. Sometimes clients do things that are not in their interest. And it's very often when they are losing it, as Betsy already said. Right, they're starting to send emails to the schools without notifying us, right? Stuff that goes into their file. They over-prepare or prepare the wrong way for their HBS interview because it's such a big deal. And when I see clients losing it and taking actions that are not benefiting them, I get really frustrated because our hard work together is at risk, right? And that good results that I can see in the near future for my client is being jeopardized. So that is my biggest frustration.
Right. Let's talk about cost. I mean, it does cost money to hire a consultant. The fees can get quite high depending on what you want. What should someone expect to pay to get the services of a consultant? David, you want to try that?
Well, I think that pricing is something where you need to look at why are you hiring a consultant in the first place? Because then a consultant is trying to help you either get into a better school than you would get into on your own, or, as many people know, a lot of the financial aid is triggered off of the same basic package for application. So if you have some of the building blocks in there already, maybe a good GMAT score that's going to help the school on its average, if you then execute really well on your application package, you can directly get more financial aid from that. So I think that applicants should be just as careful of paying too little as paying too much, because then you look at it and you think, well, if you have low prices, it probably means that the firm is going to be running a really high volume of clients. There's going to be a lot of templates and trying to kind of standardize the process, and that is not what you want. And then look at it with a kind of rational mind. Everyone who's listening, I think, probably has a very successful kind of business career pre-MBA. You guys all probably have a lot of great GMAT scores. I know that you're great at critical reasoning. That would an excellent coach work for a low wage? That mostly, a lot of the firms, it's going to be something like a 50-50 split between the firm and the consultant. They're going to get half. you want someone who is committed to being an expert in the MBA admissions process, not someone who's trying to launch a startup and they'd like to make a little bit of money on the side until it gets some traction. So then, you know, if I look at, I won't be too shy about saying we charge a pretty good price, but what do we do with that money? We invest it in things that are valuable for the applicant. So like Betsy was saying, we have a communications coach who's a former professional actor that alongside the kind of traditional mock interview stuff, we're helping applicants on the softer side. We invite clients to come and work with us in person. We have quality administrative support for helping the clients to get everything in order. And if you pay peanuts, you get monkeys. So, I mean, on the other hand, there can be cases where if your budget is limited, you can truly get a kind of 80-20. So you can certainly go to someone who has an hourly service, and if you're going to work with them, someone is probably going to try to give you the most valuable feedback first. So it is true that you can optimize, but the question is the last 20% actually so valuable that it's going to be much more than the fees that you're paying? Because Poets and Quants, you have some great articles about lifetime compensation for the different MBA programs. Even if you can get the 80% for a few $1,000s, then if the 20% was going to push you from you know, I don't know, if it was going to get you in from a Darden into a Kellogg instead or so on, you're going to make that money back and then some. You should wish that you could invest more money at that kind of ROI.
Anyone else on money and pricing?
I
Okay.
would say.
Oh no, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I would say that when you're talking to a consultant up front, in addition to talking about money, anybody who's too ready to take your money, who's too ready to say, I'm the right consultant for you, I can help you do X, Y, Z, anybody who guarantees you a particular outcome up front for a fee, run the other way. I think that, you know, whenever I'm talking to somebody, in addition to the financial concerns, I genuinely leave open the possibility that I'm not the right person. I'm not the right match. That might be David, it might be Betsy, it might be Alice, it might be one of my colleagues at the MBA Exchange or more. And so I think in terms of the money question, that's another thing too. Anybody who's too ready to take yours real quick, run.
I couldn't agree more with that. It actually freaks me out when I see some of these firms that have a credit card entry page. You can slap down the card, you can do a kind of online checkout like Amazon for that 4-school package, or you can just have them send you the invoice. That we have a limited capacity. We're only excited about working with people who have a reasonable chance to achieve their goal, and we would never sign up someone without talking to them first. So Jessica, I agree with what you said exactly.
And I would encourage students, you know, if they have money issues or if they're worried, to talk to the consultant as they're, you know, in the intake or whatever. It's we're trying to get to know the person. Money's a hot button issue for everybody. So if you only have a budget and if it doesn't work for the consultant to be in that budget, then that's the way it is. Some of this stuff should be talked about, but I know it's really hard. I mean, even we're not jumping in and saying, let's talk about money. It's not the kind of thing everybody wants to talk about, but I think it's part of what we should talk about. And we also should talk about, and I think David brought this up, it is true and people forget this, is it does cost a lot of money to go to business school, and not everybody's gonna get a scholarship, but there is some correlation. We don't have real numbers on this, I don't think, to the quality of the application and the possibility of getting some money at the other end.
Right. Okay, let's go to the questions. And there's a question that Stephen has that frankly would have been my next question anyway, which is this: how early should one begin the process of working with a consultant before an application deadline?
As early as possible, if I may take that question. Yeah. We like people who know that they want to do an MBA to contact us pretty much as soon as they know it, ideally even before that moment. Because what we like to do is not just help them with the written application, but also with all the components that go into their profile. So we've got people working with us already 1 or 2 years out,
Wow.
so that we can help them build the right experiences and expertise before they actually start their application.
Okay, because at that point you can actually shape
Exactly.
the application. You can tell them, okay, you need leadership, demonstrated leadership capacity.
Exactly.
Go join an extracurricular activity, create
Exactly.
something, or find it at work or whatever, right?
Exactly. And we're even telling some people who come to us and say, I want to apply in round one, we think that they have a better chance at a better school the year after. So we said, wait for a year, do these things first to put yourself in a better position for the next year.
Generally, I would think, and correct me if I'm wrong, that right around now is the time you should be signing up if you want to turn in a round one application in September or October. Is that correct?
At least be interviewing, or looking around at this point. I think that actually signing up. The reality is not everybody has the luxury of time and years in advance. So I think now is the time to just really start thinking about it and doing the research on consulting, and also doing the research. Can I just please ask everybody, do the research on your schools while schools are in session? That would be really helpful. And schools are still in session. We're in April. Schools are still in session until May. So go and do some help. We can help you, we can guide you, but do the research on the schools in session, because you're gonna come to us in July and say, gee, I really wanna go to Tuck. And it's like, yeah, well, there's nothing, great, go to New Hampshire, but it's so much different if you go when there's a class going on. That's just an advice for anybody, whether they want a consultant or not.
Yeah, you want to feel the energy. You also want to talk to current students and go out for coffee or lunch with them and hang out a little bit, and obviously monitor a class. I mean, you can't get any of that if a class is not in session.
And
right.
We like to talk to people about their reflections, like, hey, I just went to such and such a school and this was my reaction. And so if we're working with them early on, we can say, hey, talk to me. Does it feel like a fit, or does it actually feel like you're only visiting this school, or you're only learning about this school because it's number 2 in the ranking?
Right. Earlier, we touched on this a little bit, but not in depth, which is this. The questioner asked, can you talk about the process? How long will I be involved with the consultant? Will you be a resource beyond building the narrative? And what about test prep? Jessica?
It varies, let's say. I mean, I agree with Alice and Betsy about lead time, no doubt. And I think in addition to the points that they've made about doing on-campus research, networking with current students, et cetera, a really important function of those campus visits up front is to pressure test your hypothesis that this is a school that you want to go to. And inform yourself such that you, the candidate, are able to make a nuanced case to the school that it's their school among other wonderful options that you want to go to, so that you don't write an application that says, I want to go to a top business school. But if you're applying to Tuck, we seem to be talking a lot about Tuck today, if you write an application towards Tuck, you're making a nuanced decision on their behalf, in their favor, as you are requesting that they make a nuanced decision to admit you versus your 100 other extremely talented and accomplished colleagues and competitors in the applicant pool. That was a multi-part question. I know test prep was involved.
Right.
I think I'm missing the middle part of that sandwich here. Test prep. Oh boy. First of all, it was a long time ago. I taught test GMAT before I even thought about applying to business school. So so don't come to me for that directly at this point. But it's very, very hard to put together a top flight application when you are prepping for and retaking and stressing about the GMAT. And it can be a real heartbreaker if you've got a great application put together and then the test score doesn't come through. GMAT or GRE, I should say, which is increasingly popular as we all know. But yeah, ideally to have as much lead time as possible, to have as much in place as possible in terms of your on-campus research, networking, and so on and so forth. Please get the test taken care of. by any honest means necessary. You know, putting in the work, putting in the time, engaging a tutor if necessary, which is another ballgame. You know, it's so important, and it can be a real distraction from all the other work of application and then say also your career, or maybe a personal life, or you know, other elements that fit into this time frame.
And I'm assuming that in most cases, a consultant is not going to actually help you prep for the test, but a consultant will weigh in on whether your score is putting you in an advantageous or disadvantageous position with your application. Yes?
Right. And then that gets worked into 100 other factors at a very minimum. What's your story? What's your background? What's your future story? What are your characteristics that might make you more differentiated and therefore desirable within an applicant pool? But yes, a consultant will typically not do direct test prep with you, but will help you think about the scores that you have and the scores that you might need to work for you rather than against you in the application process.
Okay, here's an interesting question. Are European-based consultants better for applicants that are trying to enter European schools? Let's give the Europeans a shot at this first. Alice?
Yeah, the real European here. Of course, I'm very familiar with the European schools. That's partly a function of the fact that I started helping my Bain colleagues in the Amsterdam office with their applications, and they were heading to INSEAD. But the fact that INSEAD is within driving distance for me doesn't make me a good consultant to help with INSEAD applications. I think I do a very good job, but that's because I've worked with many people who've applied to INSEAD. INSEAD is actually very clear about what it wants to see from its applicants, because it asks, I think, the longest list of questions of any top MBA program. So I think it's more important that you have experience with that school than that you are geographically close to it. So I don't think you need a European consultant to help you with INSEAD, but it is nice to have a consultant who has experience with the school.
Another question here is, how many hours are generally sufficient if you already have the basic drafts of essays produced, and if in fact a complete package is not affordable to the applicant? Betsy, want to take that?
Sure. I like to think of it as it is flexible. So if you wanted a number, I'm going to just say not 1 hour. Okay, it definitely, if you're going to engage a consultant, let's just start from here. If you're going to engage a consultant and you're trying to do your budget on it, personally, and I am perfectly welcome to hear other points of view from my other panelists, but my view is that I think that by the time you get to learn something about the student, I think the consultant does a lot of investment in understanding who that student is. So I would have to say 4 hours, 3 or 4 hours are absolutely the minimum as far as getting value from someone. Now, the number of hours can go up and up and up, and it depends really on what the student's appetite is and what they really need. But I'm going to just stop there and see if anybody else wants to throw it in, because I do get that question a lot. And I do know one point on that is if they say, oh, I've already had my draft all done. Well, a lot of people, when they send me their drafts that are all done, they're just drafts that that are what they think the admissions committee wants to hear, and they're not at all personal. So, you know, the hard question is for me to say to the student, you know, this isn't going to get you what you need. And I'm not trying to sell you more work, but this isn't going to get you what you need. So let's figure out a way that we can get you to answer the questions essentially within your budget and within the amount of time you have. Okay, because also when someone asks me a question of how long it's going to take and it's July, it's a different question than if somebody asks how long it's going to take, then it's the middle of March.
Right.
Yeah, so if I can chip in, and I agree with Betsy, because we get these requests as well, and in the past we sometimes did that, and then you get indeed Stanford A essay that's all about someone's professional life. there's no point editing such an essay. So to anyone who's looking for, well, ideally not last minute, but for very limited help and only has the funds to fund a few hours of coaching, get someone to help you with the storylining, right? Your personal story and your career goals. Yeah, you'll still be out on your own when it comes to the writing, but at least the basis is there and you've got a much better shot than when you get someone to correct your English for an essay that is never even going to get you close.
Okay, so we're running out of time, but let me get maybe two more questions off, sneak them in. One is, how do consultants help reapplicants? Jessica?
Great question. In a reapplication, I think a school is likely to want to see both why they were right the first time and what's changed since. They're not going to want to hear, you were wrong this time, so let me put forth the same story just a year later. So what I typically do with somebody who's a reapplicant is think about what's different. Okay, what was the point, the jumping off point at which you applied? What may have been some of the factors that led to the ding, both in terms of the application presentation as well as the overall professional, extracurricular, and other strengths, and then really get clear on what's changed. How are you stronger? How are you going to make a much better contribution to the class now than you would have had you joined a year ago? So that's the crux of reapplications in the way I look at it.
Okay, here's a fun question. How do consultants stay up to date on the changing admission policies and standards of the different schools? David?
Yeah, well, I think that there's several ways. So one, I think there's no substitute for doing your own research. So I visited 9 programs last year face-to-face, made the horrendous trip through a bunch of economy flights, bunch of rental cars, but
and wrote about it on a blog.
I did.
Which I've read.
I wanted to put it out there so that people would have no excuse not to do the visits themselves. If it's good for you, it's good for me. But to another degree, I think that admissions consulting is also a kind of deal flow business where if you work with a relatively large number of clients, you know, if you do this full time, then you see what's working, you see what's not working. We see a huge number of other kinds of data points that are, even if it's not someone who we're coaching directly, people make the inquiries to us, like those reapplicants we were just talking about. We get a lot of reapplicants who send us their materials and ask what went wrong. And yeah, from that, that's how you can get a good sense of what's working or what's not working.
Great. Well, listen, thank you so much for participating. Special thank you to David White and Alice Van Harten of Menlo Coaching, to Betsy Masser of Master Admissions in Oakland, actually just upstairs from us right now, and Jessica Burlingame, Jessica Burlingame of the MBA Exchange, calling in from Paris. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much. And let me just remind everyone else that, okay, if you want to see who are the most reviewed consultants in our directory, you can go on the search bar on the left and you click a little thing and it will literally give you the consultants from top to bottom based on the number of reviews that they have. And read the reviews. I think they're really super helpful. And they may help you determine whether or not you might have chemistry and the fit's right on the basis of what other people are willing to reveal about their experiences with these fine folks. So thank you very much for watching. We will post this on our site. It will stay on Facebook as well. So if you'd like to watch it again, or if you haven't been here and you're watching it in archive time, I hope you enjoy it. Thanks very much. I'm John Byrne with Poets and Quants.